The following is a paid program by Zola Levitt Ministries. Anger in Gaza, war in Lebanon, rumblings in Iran. As the world focuses on the Mideast quagmire, Zola Levitt Ministries presents Daniel and the Last Days Battle for Planet Earth.
A hearty shalom to all of you. Jeffrey Seif here with my friend Sandra Levitt.
Shalom. Hello. Welcome back, Jeff. Where are we going today?
Well, we're going to look at time. You ever heard the expression, it's about time? Let's look at time in Daniel. I'd like to begin by looking in chapter 12, verse 8. He says, "My Lord," after the Lord giving him a vision, he says, "My Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" He's befuddled, he's confused. And he said in verse 9, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." Seems to me that in the text, time is marked out. It's unfolding according to a certain program. And there's this time of the end. And the Daniel prophecy comes alive as we move toward that time. Fascinating story.
It's a wonderful story. They were looking for time. They watched the time, the looking and coming of the Messiah. They're waiting for the Messiah. And Daniel is talking about the Messiah is coming. Go on your way and seal it up. And we go on. But everybody looks at time. What time is it? We wear watches, the sun, the moon. Everyone wants to know what's going to happen.
Jewish people believe that history doesn't just spiral out of control, but there's a certain order to time as it unfolds.
Right. That's their book. Yes.
Yes, and in this book we see secrets to what will happen in time before the end of time. You're going to enjoy it as we look at Daniel and the last day's battle for planet Earth.
About the time of Jesus' birth, ancient wise men, such as the Essenes, searched the heavens for answers to vexing earthly dilemmas. Some thought the movement of the sun and moon would tell them when they could expect the long-awaited deliverer.
The ancient Essenes believed that they were living at the ragged edge of time. While driving to their first century headquarters, I wondered if the prophet Daniel might perhaps do a better job of deciphering the times and the seasons. It's about time. That's what they say when they're frustrated. It's about time. Well, in this place, it really is about time, or it was about time anyway. We are at the headquarters of the Essene community, a sect that existed contemporaneous with the times of Jesus, where people were really bent on interpreting time. They penned literature. We have experts coming in this program that are going to be unpacking some of the mysteries in Essene literature and giving a window into how they understood the text. Well, here now in the 9th chapter of Daniel, we see where this wise author speaks about time, and he says it's about time. Oh, yes, it's about time, all right, 70 weeks in particular. In Daniel chapter 9, he talks about time. Oh, he's talked about it in other ways with seeing visions of beasts. He's seen visions of various animals. He's seen visions of statues. And now he sees a vision of the calendar unfolding to a point where he sees something about the first coming of the Messiah and the second coming of the Messiah. This prophecy, the 70 weeks, is deemed by some to be the most fascinating prophecy in all of biblical literature. Verse 24, he says, 70 weeks are decreed for thy people. And then he goes on to describe 69 weeks. Elsewhere he speaks weeks of years. So we're not talking about a week literally as much as a 7-year period. He sees 69 weeks and then a famous final week, a tribulation period, as it's referred to. When you follow the story in Daniel, you come upon this. You can just please read the text. It's fascinating. He sees a time coming for the cutting off of the anointed one. What's fascinating about this 70 weeks prophecy going out to 69 weeks or 69 years is the fact that if one takes the launching off point, he says, 70 weeks are decreed for thy people to finish transgressions, to make an end, to make atonement, to bring in everlasting righteousness. In verse 25, he says, know therefore and discern that from the going forth of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, he goes out 69 years of weeks of years. Interestingly, if you look at the decree in Nehemiah 1 and 2, when Jerusalem was to be rebuilt, this falls on the 14th of March, 445, and if you take 69 weeks and you go by the biblical calendar, 360 days in that year, you add up those days, the moment when this season expires is when Jesus, in April the 6th, makes his way into Jerusalem in 32 AD riding on a horse. Fascinating. You'll see in Daniel he talks about the coming of the Messiah and brings it down to the day.
It is all about time. I like in Revelation 12:12 at the end where it says, but woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short. Jeff, his time is short.
Yes, it's an interesting passage for a variety of reasons. Apparently things heat up at day's end.
Right.
The devil seems to have a more active interest in stirring it all up. Things just go from bad to worse, it seems. It's not just wrath, but he comes down with great wrath. He's really angry.
But this is the end time, and that's what I think is important for us to know. If we believe a pre-trib rapture, we're out of here. This is for people that are left behind. This is the horror that they have to go through.
Yes. Now, the way someone divides up time, there is prophecy students see that world goes toward a certain point in time. There's a rapture. There's a taking away of the believers.
Right.
And then there's this tribulation period when it all goes bad, and that's particularly
Bad
what
to
we're
worse.
seeing here.
Bad to worse is where it goes.
My argument would be that before it goes bad, the birth pangs of it all will be manifest before the dawning of the era.
It's like time. I can always look behind my life and see where God has brought me. If I had the overall picture of time, I think I would really be scared of what was ahead of me. So God is always good to us in giving us these little, what I call peaks at time.
Yeah, and this is a window into the future. We're told the devil will come down. He knows his time is short. It reminds me of the fact that history is not spiraling out of control, but is unfolding according to a predetermined pattern. They lived at the ragged edge of time, or so they construed it. They believed that a coming great conflagration would facilitate a contest between the sons of darkness and the sons of light, and the world was going to emerge out of darkness and chaos into light, as there was a new era dawning, or so they believed, the Messianic era. And the Essenes here in this vicinity believed they were harbingers of the new world to come. They wrote their beliefs in commentaries, some of which were pulled out of caves like this, Cave 11. Very famous cave, in fact. It's off the beaten path some, way up in the mountain. We're looking for treasure found in God's Word, and we've been looking at Daniel. Here I'm interested in the 9th chapter particularly, or at least that's my beginning point. We're looking at time. The Essenes believed in time. They regulated their days very consciously. They believed the years were regulated consciously. And they believed that they were at the place in time when the new world was to come with the Messianic era. But in conjunction with that new world and good world, there was a bad world too, a bad moon rising, or so they perceived it. And they didn't perceive it alone. Daniel, for his part, envisioned in 9:27 that there would be this anti-Messiah who would make a covenant with individuals for 7 years for 1 week. But in the middle of that 7-year period, called the Tribulation period, he would show his colors, his dark colors. Individuals thought he was the Savior in many respects, but instead they find him to be a vulture, one who only intends to trap its prey and then peck away at it, to eat it and to destroy it. Daniel tells us that he will cause sacrifice to cease in a rebuilt temple, that he will proclaim himself that he is God, and that he will then present with these abominations, this abomination which makes desolate, according to Daniel 9:27. And then there would be an end, he says, that this will happen until the end, until the consummation. The Essenes specialized, according to Josephus, in looking at the end, but we really get our read of the end from the book Revelation. Therein, John spoke from a cave as well. It was an island of Patmos, not here, seemingly at the edge of civilized world, here in the Dead Sea area. For John's part, he was taken away to an island, and from a cave he was given a word. And I want to look at what he had to say real quick in Revelation chapters 12 and 13. He speaks at the first about a woman in heaven who gives birth to a child. He says in verse 5 that she bears a male child, one who is going to rule the world, the Messiah, one who eventually is going to hold sway over God's creation. John sees as well that this beast will emerge. And you know, inasmuch as Daniel talks about beasts, so does John. This beast emerges to try and kill the child. But 'twas not to be. We're told the child escapes to the wilderness. And then what happens is he goes after the woman who gives birth to the child. And pray tell, who was it that brought the male child, the Christ child, into the world? Jesus came through the Jewish people. We're told in verse 12, chapter 12, the devil was enraged, and that he then sets his wrath on the woman in verse 13. John says that he then persecuted the woman who gave birth to that child. In verse 17, we're told that the dragon was enraged with the woman and went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and who have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Interestingly, there are descendants of this woman. Of course, the woman, Jesus, came through the Jewish people, and there are descendants of the Jewish people that come to faith. John mentions, whether figuratively or literally, he sees 12,000 from each tribe. There's a massive army of believers, individuals of Jewish extract who come to faith. And what happens, inasmuch as the devil wasn't able to destroy the Christ child, we're told here that he goes after the people group that brings the Messiah into the world, even those who, according to the text, have the testimony of Jesus. We're told in the 13th chapter that one of the ways that he invests energies against these believers, we're told that he requires of them a mark. In verse 16 of the 13th chapter, he causes all, both small and great, poor, free, and slave, to receive the mark on their right hands and on their foreheads. And with the lack thereof, individuals are unable to buy and sell, and so they have to flee. Jesus warned that when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies in these last days, let those in Judea flee to the mountains, flee to the hills. And here we are at a hill. Actually, years ago, it was a place of refuge. Individuals fled here. They deposited scrolls here for posterity's sake, and not just in Cave 11, but a plethora of caves all about, where they left a testimony of how they envisioned a world at day's end. You know, it's fascinating to me. I think the best source for understanding the world at day's end is the Bible itself. And so here in this series, we're going down a road that's going to lead us to understanding Daniel and the last day's battle for planet Earth. And there's more to come.
For insightful perspectives of Israel and Bible prophecy, ask for our free monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter. When you call, be sure to also ask for our free catalog with the latest videos, books, and music. Our correspondence course, the Institute of Jewish Christian Studies, includes reading packets, teaching cassettes, and mail-in tests. You may want to join us on an upcoming tour of Israel, Greece, or the Holy Land Experience theme park in Orlando, Florida. Please contact us for more information.
Mashiach, Yeshua, Matzil, Leolam, Anishmati, Ani Yamin, Ani Yamin. Messiah, Yeshua, Savior, forever. In my heart, I believe. I believe. I believe.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here in the Jordan River. Sandra Levitt and I want to invite you to join us for a trip. Busload of pilgrims are here, and 6 pastors came with us that are behind us here, baptizing individuals. Why not you sometime join Sandra Levitt and I for the trip of a lifetime here in Israel and be baptized in the Jordan River?
For more information on our next tour to Israel, call 1-800-WONDERS.
In an earlier segment, you saw Jeff at Qumran. We see these sites also on the tour. I always say, go to Israel, learn the Bible in Israel. It is a wonderful experience, Jeff. I mean, I see Qumran. I know where Qumran is. The Dead Sea is there. Masada is there. This is a lifetime of learning in just a very short time when you're on a tour.
Yes, and come, learn, and grow
Absolutely.
with us.
Yes, us.
I've heard it said that one trip to the Holy Land is like a year of Bible college. It's a real illuminating experience.
It really is, and everyone that comes on the tour says the same thing. I'm so glad I came. My Bible is never the same.
Right, and we want to show Israel through Jewish eyes. Now, speaking of a set of Jewish eyes, in Jerusalem this last time, we picked up Professor Mogen Broshi, former curator of the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit in Israel, a fascinating individual, a scholar in his own right. I remember while driving with him from Jerusalem to Qumran, we were schmoozing a little bit, and he was asking me about my interest in the scrolls, and I told him I used to teach it at a college level, and well, who was your guide? And I mentioned, well, Giza Vermish was my hero, who was an Oxford professor. And he goes, yes, Giza and I had tea a few weeks ago. And then I'd mentioned James Charlesworth out of Princeton. Yes, they spoke most recently. This guy's connected to the world of scholarship.
But that's been his life. The Dead Sea Scrolls have been his life.
And I'm so thrilled that we were able to secure an interview.
Absolutely.
You're going to love the interview with Professor Broshi, and then we're following up with another scholar as well. We're of the mind to give windows into how Jewish folk interpreted World's End. Daniel gives us a window into that world, and we're standing and interpreting ourselves. But now, let's look and see how ancient Jews saw the world at World's End.
Having overseen those scrolls and What did you learn from that about the material culture, about who the Essenes were?
The Essenes were unlike anything existing at that time. They were the first monastic community in the world, at least in the Western world.
That's one of the things they had, was this concept of a real understanding of time. And I remember seeing from the Israel Museum a type of calendar that was found there. So it was almost a sundial that told exact times. It had also for summer and winter and variances like that. And I thought that was a fascinating piece.
Certainly time was very, very, very important for them. When do you pray? When do you have your sacred meals? Every meal in the community was sacred. When do you take the ritual baths? And so on.
Here at Qumran, it was most important for the Essene priests to be accurate in their assessment of the times and seasons. We'll talk to Stephen Fahn, an editor of the Dead Sea Scrolls, about this sundial's place in determining accurate time.
Well, Will, what we have here is actually a real squeeze, a full mold of the original sundial that they found in the eastern gate here at Qumran. Here at a place where you had priests who always had to make sure that everything was right on time. Because God is on time, they have to be on time with Him. And this was the most exact timepiece that we know of for finding out one single hour of the day.
Right, now the Essenes were a kind of community unto their own, separate from traditional Judaism at the time in many ways. Let me ask you, what's the significance of this being a sundial as opposed to traditional Jewish counting and things of that nature that were based on the lunar cycles?
Well, you know, at the temple they did have sundials, but they weren't quite like this one. In fact, this particular sundial is part of the Enochic telling of time. And the book of Enoch tells time according to the sun and according to the rising of the sun at various places along the horizon. And from there, they go on to see their year only in the terms of the sun, a 364-day solar year, which actually makes the lunar calendar totally obsolete.
I think it's interesting that they use the sundial for their appointed times and seasons, if you will, to tell them when to eat, when to bathe, etc., when to pray.
Yes, well, from here, inside this particular site, heaven came down like an umbilicus from heaven. They understood that the angels were around about them, and it formed a whole continuum going up to heaven with all the heavenly beings around the throne, and finally God up himself there. So time and keeping on time was extremely important, because if a person through the calendars had their Passover a week too early or a day too late, they were saying the prayers that used God's name in it on the wrong day. That's using God's name in vain.
Yeah.
So time is extremely important. And so it was really the purpose and the role of the priests to interpret time properly so people would actually be properly in sync between heaven and earth.
Now let me ask you, as far as their end times views, what else, what other scrolls, what other writings were found here that made it kind of, if you will, into Christian doctrine?
The continuum that you might have between what we have among this group known as the Essenes, with all the writings that they collected and all the writings they wrote themselves, the connection we probably have closest with the New Testament is what happens through John the Baptist, who would have been considered either an ex-Essene or part of a missionary wing of the Essene movement. But one of the things that they would have all been in agreement about was the issue of the heart. You got to get the heart right.
Right.
The issues of time and how particular you have to be on that had to do with how much one emphasized the heart over against the issues of halakhic ritual.
So Steve, we'd like to thank you for joining us today and sharing with us everything about the calendar here and also about the site. Thank you very much.
And that's Dr. Stephen Fahn and Will King interviewing him. I'm really proud of Will. He's taken on the job of living in Israel and reporting for us. I'm really proud of him, Jeff.
You remind me of the Lord who said, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased."
It does a mother's heart good to see a son or a daughter following in the Lord's footsteps. It really does.
John says, "No greater joy than to know that my children follow the truth."
Absolutely.
Seems to me that a number of Jewish children are going to be following the truth. In Daniel 12, we're told, as we noted at the beginning here, that the words of the book are sealed up to the end. And at the end, the very last verse, chapter 12, verse 13, go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of days. It's interesting that Daniel arises to his inheritance at the end of days. Jewish people believe in rising to an inheritance. Inheritance is like a family term, what your father, what your parents bequeathed to you. And interestingly, as you brought out, the inheritance is the resurrection. Talk about that for a minute.
Right. What
please.
happens at the end of the story? The end of the story is, and again it's in Daniel 12, and it says in Daniel 12:2, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. This is resurrection.
Yes, and it's interesting that this is the resurrection in the Old Testament text.
It's not a Christian thing. This is a Jewish thing.
Right. Many people believe that the concept of the resurrection is born out of New Testament understanding. It certainly is stressed there. In John 11:25, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life.
Absolutely.
But remember that before he said that, it's precipitated by a woman saying, I know that my brother will rise again.
That's
in response to which Jesus said, I am the resurrection. The point is, it was already existent in her frame of thinking, a resurrection. This is a Jewish woman.
Right, but also Abraham and Isaac. Abraham knew that if something happened to Isaac after he sacrificed him, he would see him again. Resurrection again.
Right, that's the argument why he'd be willing to let him be slain there on Moriah, because he'd rise again. I think it's interesting that Jewish people do believe in a resurrection, an emergence from the grave at day's end. Techiyat hamatim in Hebrew, the resurrection to life.
Absolutely, to life. And as you go, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Our offer on this program, the Messianic Prophecy Scroll. Beautiful, useful, revealing, a lovely and very spiritual art object for mantelpiece or coffee table display. This wood and parchment scroll is hand-copied and handmade. The Messianic prophecies, including those of Isaiah, are written in Hebrew and English. A marvelous witnessing tool. Ask for the Messianic Prophecy Scroll. And you may also call toll-free for our colorful monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter. This free publication includes Bible lessons, insightful news commentary, Hebrew lessons, and more. Call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-966-3377. Or write to Zola, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225. You can also see our Levitt letters, TV programs, and national airing schedule at www.levitt.com. Please remember, Zola Levitt Ministries depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you. This has been a paid program brought to you by Zola Levitt Ministries.